Hello everyone, hope you're having a wonderful day. In today's episode, the fight becomes a race against time. Mrs. Lan signed one harmless paper, and Lin may already be using it to move money and seize control. Yuri and Tu Tieu have only one chance to stop it, before holiday closures make everything harder. If you enjoy the story, don't forget to hit subscribe. The kitchen was warm, but the message on Yuri's phone turned it into ice. Too late. She already used it. Yuri read it twice, hoping the words would change. They didn't. Tu Tieu leaned closer, eyes steady. Used it how? Mrs. Lan's hands trembled around the folder. I don't understand. It was only management. Yuri called the bank. Holiday recording. He called the commune office, closed. Every number led to the same dead end. He set the phone down, jaw tight. That's why she did it on New Year's, so we can't stop her. Mrs. Lan's face drained. Lin wouldn't. She promised. Promises are not protection, Tu Tieu said gently. Documents are. Tuong, who had followed them in, spoke fast. Tomorrow morning we get certified copies, then we go to the bank with your mum and freeze anything we can. Tomorrow might be too late, Yuri muttered. Then tonight we prepare, Tu Tieu said. Mrs. Lan, what exactly did you give Lin? Mrs. Lan hesitated. The company seal, and she asked for my signature sample. Yuri's eyes sharpened. After the commune? She nodded. In the car, she said it was normal. Tu Tieu's mind clicked. So she has authority, your seal, and your signature. That means she can sign contracts and represent the company even while you're asleep, if she has the right partner. Yuri looked at the proposal folder on the table. Mr. Tuan. Mrs. Lan blinked. He came last night. He offered a big project. A project that needs capital, Tu Tieu finished. And Lin got management power this morning. Yuri's voice went low. She's using my mother's name to send money. Mrs. Lan's eyes filled. I didn't authorize anything. I know, Yuri said, softer, hurt under his anger. But she's making it look like you did. Tu Tieu placed a hand over Mrs. Lan's shaking fingers. You were manipulated. That's not the same as choosing harm. That night they acted like a small crisis team. Tu Tieu wrote a tight plan. Commune office at opening, then bank, then verify Mr. Tuan's project, then file an official report for abuse of power of attorney. Tuong texted his cousin at the commune to be ready early. Yuri gathered Mrs. Lan's bank book and account papers, checking every number twice like he could memorize a way out. Yuri's phone buzzed again. Unknown number. Deposit already sent. Mrs. Lan went pale. Deposit? I didn't. Yuri stood so fast his chair scraped. Then she did. Tu Tieu blocked him with a firm arm. Not tonight. If you rush to Lin, she'll cry, record and claim you threatened her. She wants you messy. Yuri's jaw flexed. So we just wait? We move smart, Tu Tieu corrected. We move first. Mrs. Lan whispered, I'm sorry. Yuri's eyes softened for a second. Mum, I just don't want to lose you to her lies. You won't, Tu Tieu said. Not if you stand with the truth now. They tried to sleep. No one truly did. Before sunrise, they were already on the road. The commune gate was locked, but Tuong's cousin waited nearby, rubbing his hands for warmth. You're early, he whispered. Good. Lin hasn't come yet. When the office opened, Tu Tieu stepped forward, polite, calm, fast. We need certified copies of yesterday's power of attorney and any related submissions. The clerk looked at Mrs. Lan. You're the principal? Mrs. Lan nodded, voice thin. Yes, I want to review what I signed. The clerk hesitated, then searched through files. After a long minute, he pulled out a folder and slid a paper forward. Ms. Lin already submitted a request this morning, using this authority. Mrs. Lan's breath caught. Submitted what? The clerk pointed to the header. A transfer request related to your company account. It includes a contract and payment instruction. Yuri's throat went dry. Transfer of money? The clerk nodded, lowering his voice. Because you're the principal, you can file a cancellation notice. But if the bank already processed payment, a cancellation here won't pull the money back. Tu Tieu's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. Then we need the bank now. Please certify these copies. The printer whirred. The clerk stamped and signed quickly, then slid the sleeve to Mrs. Lan. "Go," he said, almost kindly, "and bring your ID." They ran to the nearest bank branch the moment it opened. Holiday chaos filled the lobby, people withdrawing cash, sending gifts, laughing like nothing bad could happen today. Tu Tieu squeezed Yuri's sleeve. "Calm face," she whispered. "We need help, not a scene." At the counter, Mrs. Lan placed her ID down with shaking hands. "I need transaction history for my company account today and yesterday, and I need to limit any authority I gave." Tu Tieu slid the certified copy forward. "Possible abuse of power of attorney. Please check urgent transactions," the teller typed, clicked and frowned. Yuri leaned forward. "What do you see?" The teller hesitated, then turned the screen slightly toward Mrs. Lan. "There was an outgoing transfer early this morning," she said quietly. "A large one." Mrs. Lan's lips parted. "To who?" The teller read from the record. "To an account labelled Tuan Construction Services, reference, project deposit." Yuri's vision narrowed. "How much?" The teller swallowed. "Almost all of your company's available balance." Mrs. Lan made a small sound, half breath, half sob, and Tu Tieu tightened her grip on her arm before she fell. The teller's eyes stayed on the screen. "And there's also a request submitted to change the account's authorised manager," she added. Yuri's stomach dropped. "To Lin?" The teller looked up, face serious. "Do you want to freeze the account right now?" Tu Tieu answered before anyone else could. "Yes, freeze it." Mrs. Lan blinked through tears. Can we get the money back?" The teller shook her head gently. "A freeze stops future movement, but the transfer has already cleared the internal system. Recovery depends on investigation, the recipient account, and a formal dispute." Yuri's hands curled into fists. "Show us the authorization." The teller opened the scanned document. On the screen was Mrs. Lan's signature. Too perfect, too familiar, and beside it, the company seal impression. Under that, the name Lin appeared as authorized representative. Mrs. Lan whispered, horrified, "She already registered herself?" Tu Tieu's voice stayed steady. "Print everything, timestamps, copies of the transfer, and the request to change manager." The teller nodded. "I can print a transaction statement and a certified copy request form, but you should file a police report immediately if you believe fraud occurred." Yuri's phone vibrated in his pocket. A missed call, Lin. Then another message from the unknown number flashed across his lock screen. "Now you understand. Try to stop the next transfer." Yuri lifted his eyes to Tu Tieu, and Tu Tieu for the first time that morning looked truly afraid. The bank's printer hummed like a warning. Transaction statement, timestamp, recipient account, a request to change the company's authorized manager, filed under Lin's name, attached to Mrs. Lan's signature and the company seal. Tu Tieu kept her voice steady. "Freeze the account, now." The teller nodded. "Frozen. That stops future movement, but the transfer already cleared. Recovery depends on investigation and whether the recipient funds can be held." Mrs. Lan looked like the floor was moving. I gave her the seal." "You gave it because you trusted family," Tu Tieu said softly. "That's what she used." The teller printed copies and lowered her voice. "If you believe fraud occurred, file a police report today. The sooner we send the request, the better." They left the bank with a thick stack of papers and a single ugly truth. Lin didn't just borrow authority, she weaponized it. On the teller's monitor, Tu Tieu had seen the scanned authorization file, Mrs. Lan's signature, the seal impression, and Lin's name typed into the authorized manager field like it belonged there. As they left the bank, Yuri's phone buzzed again from the unknown number. "Freeze one account, we'll use another." Tu Tieu's eyes hardened. Then she's moving to the next target, property or shares. At the police station, Tu Tieu laid the timeline out cleanly. Commune signing, seal handed over, unknown threats, transfer at dawn, bank printouts, and the attempted manager change. The officer listened carefully, then stamped a report receipt. "We'll request the bank to preserve records and attempt to hold on the recipient account," he said. "But if the money was moved again, it becomes harder." Yuri's jaw clenched. "Then we find the recipient, Tuan Construction Services." Tu Tieu nodded. "We also verify the project. If it's fake, that proves intent." Tuang stepped in. "I'll go with Tu Tieu. Uri should stay with Mrs. Lan. Lin might pressure her again." Yuri hated it, but it was true. He turned to his mother. "Mum, you don't meet Lin alone. Not today." Mrs. Lan's eyes were wet. "I understand." Tu Tieu and Tuang followed the address printed on the proposal. It was supposed to be an office. It was a dead metal door with a fading sign and dust in the window. No lights, no name on the directory, nothing that looked like a company that deserved almost all the balance. A shop owner next door listened, then snorted. That place, empty for months, different signs come and go. Tu Tieu forced a polite smile. "Have you seen a man named Tuan?" "Men in neat shirts come sometimes," the owner said. "They don't stay." Tuang asked quietly, "Would you be willing to tell police that?" The owner shrugged. "If it helps you. Bring them. I'll say what I saw." Tu Tieu snapped photos. The locked door, the faded sign, the street number, the empty interior through a crack. Then she called Yuri. "It's a shell," she said. "Office is fake. The neighbour will confirm it." Yuri's voice tightened on the line. "Then Lin and Tuan are working together." "Yes," Tu Tieu said, "and she threatened a next transfer. She won't stop at money." Tuang leaned in. "Get ready. She'll counter with emotion or a bigger lie." Tu Tieu's stomach sank, like the DNA story. Yuri didn't respond immediately. Then he said, "Lin just pulled up at the gate." Tu Tieu's pulse spiked. "Don't let her corner Mrs. Lan." "I won't," Yuri promised. "Get back fast." At home, Mrs. Lan sat rigid on the sofa, hands clasped like she was trying to hold herself together. Yuri placed the bank statements and the police receipt on the table in front of her. "Mum, this is not misunderstanding. This is a transaction." Mrs. Lan whispered. "I raised her. How did she become this?" Yuri swallowed. "Because she wants control more than peace." A motorbike engine sounded outside. Yuri checked the door camera. Pink top, familiar hair, Lin. He stood, expression flat. "Stay behind me." The door opened. Lin stepped in with a bag of porridge and medicine, smiling like nothing happened. "Mum, I brought..." She froze when she saw Yuri. "Yuri, you're here." Yuri's voice was calm enough to hurt. "Yeah, because our company account is almost empty." Lin blinked, then forced concern. "Empty? What do you mean?" Yuri slid the printed statement across the table. Lin's eyes dropped to the page. For a split second, something real flashed. Annoyance, not shock. Then she gasped, perfectly timed. "What is this? Mum, did something happen?" Mrs. Lan's voice shook. "Lin, did you send money to Mr. Tuan?" Lin's face crumpled into hurt. "Why would I do that?" Yuri didn't raise his voice. "Because the transfer is labelled Project Deposit, and you are listed as authorised representative." Tears appeared instantly. Too fast. "Yuri, you're accusing me?" Lin whispered. "After I apologised? After I tried to take care of Mum?" Mrs. Lan's hands trembled. "Answer me." Lin turned to her, voice soft. "Mum, I only manage paperwork. If money moved, maybe someone forged documents, or the bank made a mistake." Yuri leaned in, still ice. "Then why are the seal and signature attached to your manager request?" Lin's tears stalled for half a heartbeat. "Because the clerk needed it," she said quickly. "You were there too late to understand." Yuri's mouth tightened. "The police understand. We filed the report." That sentence finally cracked her mask, not into panic, into anger. "You called the police on family," Lin snapped. Mrs. Lan flinched. "Lin, did you do it?" Lin stared at Mrs. Lan for a long beat, calculating. Then she changed tactics. Instead of answering, she pulled a thin folder from her bag and placed it on the table like a weapon wrapped in paper. "Mum," Lin said softly, Before you listen to them, I need you to see the truth about Tu Tieu. Yuri's stomach dropped. Lin opened the folder. On top was a clinic-style page with a bold stamp and neat formatting. DNA. Mrs. Lan's eyes widened at the page. DNA? Lin's voice turned tender. I didn't want to hurt you, Mum, but you deserve the truth. Yuri lifted a hand. Stop. That could be fake. Lin snapped back, offended. Then why are you scared to let her read it? Mrs. Lan's breath shook. Open it, she whispered. Yuri's chest tightened. Mum, please. Lin slid the page forward again, her sadness hiding triumph. Just read. Yuri's blood ran cold, because he knew exactly what Lin was doing. If she couldn't win with money alone, she would destroy trust next. And somewhere on the road back, Tu Tieu was still racing, hoping she wasn't about to lose Mrs. Lan's heart along with the company's future. After an anonymous warning, too late, she already used it. Yuri, Tu Tieu and Mrs. Lan realised Lin has weaponised the power of attorney. At dawn, they secure certified copies at the commune office and race to the bank. The teller confirms a huge project deposit transfer to Tuan Construction Services, draining nearly all company funds, and shows Lin filed to become the account's authorised manager, using Mrs. Lan's signature and company seal. They freeze the account, gather timestamps and documents, and file a police report, fearing the money will vanish again. Tu Tieu and Tuang investigate the project address and find a dead shell office, proof the deal is fake. Back home, Lin arrives acting caring, denies everything, and plays victim to stall them until nightfall. When pressed, she unveils a DNA report to undermine Tu Tieu and shatter Mrs. Lan's trust.